Good afternoon and welcome to CESLC Insider. Join us every other Wednesday at noon to find education on topics that matter to you. I'm your host, Angelique Jackson, Manager of Business Development and Marketing. And here at Charles E. Smith Life Communities, we deliver care and experiences personally tailored to those we serve, no matter where they are in life's journey. Our full suite of care and services include independent living, assisted living, memory care, post-acute and long-term care, and primary care with a focus on older adults at Hirsch Health Center. To explore all our campus has to offer, please visit our website at www.smithlifecommunities.org, or you can call Greg Smythe in our Welcome Center to schedule your private tour. And you can reach him at 301-228-0641. For your convenience, this information will be provided in the chat. And I just want to say a special thank you to everyone who tuned in today. We want to hear from you all, so please add your questions to the chat. A few things before we begin. I want to give a big thank you actually to Optum, who sponsors all of our Insider events. And also a reminder to everybody that we will be recording today's webinar. So again, if you can keep yourselves muted. And after we're finished with this webinar, the recorded version will be on our YouTube channel. And you can also find that link in the chat. And then there you'll find other programs, past programs we've done, and so much more. So next month is a National Stroke Awareness Month. Stroke is the number 5 leading cause of death and the number 1 cause of long-term disability in the United States. And according to CDC.gov, every 40 seconds, someone in the United States suffers a stroke. So today, Insider welcomes Stroke Comeback Center's Executive Director, Suzanne Coyle. Suzanne, thank you so much for joining us today. And can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the Stroke Comeback Center, and what led to your passion of educating about stroke?
Absolutely. So thanks for the opportunity to be here today. My name is Suzanne Coyle, and I'm the Executive Director at Stroke Comeback Center. And Stroke Comeback Center is a nonprofit organization that provides long-term support to stroke survivors and their families. People can come to us at any point in their stroke recovery, whether their stroke was very recent or many years ago. And we provide all different kinds of services and programs that can help stroke survivors continue their recovery. And also we recognize that stroke impacts the whole family. So we have programs as well for family members and care partners. We have social events, and we have lots of educational opportunities. And so it's a really supportive community that helps each other along this road to recovery. So, I'm sorry, go ahead. No. I'm a speech language pathologist by training, and I was really excited to join the Stroke Comeback Center team back in 2008. And what's made me so passionate about it is that I've seen how stroke survivors continue to recover many, many years after their stroke when they're provided with good services and support. And so I've been with the organization for a long time, and I've seen it grow, and it's one of my favorite things to talk about what we do, but also to talk about how to prevent stroke and improve stroke awareness in the community.
Thank you. So we should get started. My first question for you is if you could explain to our audience, what is a stroke? How is it diagnosed? And I guess what are the difference in types of stroke?
Sure. So a stroke is the name for what happens when there's interruption to the blood supply in the brain for any period of time. There are 2 main kinds of strokes. There's what's called an ischemic stroke, which is when there's a blockage in the blood supply in the brain. And then there's what's called a hemorrhagic stroke or a bleed. And that's when the blood vessel ruptures and then there's bleeding in the brain. It's really important that stroke be diagnosed quickly so that the stroke survivor well, hopefully becomes a stroke survivor. And we're very passionate about using the term stroke survivor instead of stroke victim.
I like that.
Yes, so that stroke survivor can get immediate medical care and have the best outcomes for recovery.
Wonderful.
Mhm.
So how is it diagnosed?
So there's a quick acronym that will help people know the signs and symptoms of a stroke. And I think we have a slide that will help us know what that acronym is.
Let's share that.
Okay. Okay. So it can be remembered with the phrase be fast. So B is a sudden change in someone's balance. We most often think of one side of the body being weaker than the other. So a sudden change in balance. E is for eyes, a sudden change in someone's vision. F is for face. And we think of that as a sudden drooping in the face or that one-sided weakness in the face. A is for arms. So if someone notices weakness on one side of the body and one arm in particular, and if you try and put your arms straight out and one is lower than the other and can't get quite up as high as that strong arm. S is for speech, and that's a sudden change in someone's speech clarity, or maybe their ability to think of words, or maybe if their words aren't going together in a way that makes sense.
Okay.
But most importantly, T is for time. And that means it's time to call 911. Don't wait to see if it changes. Don't drive someone to the hospital. Call 911 and get that immediate stroke care. And then to answer your question of how is a stroke actually diagnosed, once someone presents to the hospital, there's what we call neuroimaging. So there's a CT scan or an MRI. And that is how the physicians are then able to diagnose that a stroke is happening.
Thank you, so helpful. And this is such a great tool. Be fast.
Be
Yeah.
fast,
So
yes.
be fast. So facial drooping, I've always heard, when you think someone close to you has suffered a stroke, they ask, can you smile?
Yes, can you
Yeah.
smile? Exactly. And so if you see the smile's only on one side of the face, that is a real quick sign. And people don't have to have all of these signs. If they have any of these signs, it could be a stroke. And so it's so important to then call 911.
So I'm surprised that you would have to say such a thing and that you said, oh, don't drive yourself or don't drive.
Yes. Well, I think that so many people are afraid of calling an ambulance when something isn't that big of a deal, or going to the emergency room to find out that they could have gone to their primary care doctor. And, we can see that that's true in some situations, but when the possibility could be a stroke, we just don't want to take that risk.
Right.
So as soon as someone calls 911, it starts the stroke protocol. And then it's important that we know how long these symptoms have been going on, because there's a very important window of time in which someone can get these great life-saving treatments, like the clot buster drugs called TPA, or that someone could get what's called a thrombectomy, so where they could go in and they can remove that clot. And these are amazing treatments that are available, but you have to have really quick emergency care to get them. And I can't tell you how many stroke survivors I've worked with through the years who didn't recognize that stroke was happening. And they thought, oh, maybe if I just give myself some time, it will get better. I feel kind of off. Let me just lie down for a little bit. And that's the exact opposite of what we want. It's so important. Call 911.
So feeling weird, your balance off, your vision changes, don't go to sleep.
Don't go to sleep. Absolutely do not. Yeah, just call 911. You may have been in a local hospital that has a stroke center, and you can hear, they announce in the hospital, stroke arriving in 3 minutes. It's because, that team knows how important it is to get that great immediate emergency care.
So time is of the essence.
Time is absolutely of the essence. Yes.
So we will, audience, everybody who's watching will be happy to share this wonderful resource after the event, so look out for that.
Yep, and we'd encourage you, hang it on your refrigerator. Keep it available so that it stays at the top of your mind, and you don't have to stop and think. It's one of those things we just want everyone to be able to recognize a stroke when they see it and know that importance of immediately calling 911.
Thank you. So Michelle actually has a question. Can you please differentiate between TIAs? And I think we did that. Maybe she wants a little bit more
Yeah, I will talk
information.
about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so a TIA, or it stands for a transient ischemic attack. Sometimes it's called a mini stroke. And what happens with a TIA is someone has those one of those symptoms of a stroke, but then it can resolve on its own and resolve. Sometimes it resolves fairly quickly.
Okay.
And so there's, the risk that people think, oh, phew, well, that's a bullet dodged. But really what a TIA is a warning sign, because if somebody has a TIA, if they have that mini stroke, it could mean that a bigger stroke could happen down the road.
Okay.
And so it's really important to take that TIA seriously and have a good conversation with your doctor and figure out maybe why that TIA happened. I have met people who have said, I had a TIA 10 years ago and I haven't had a stroke since because I managed it with my doctor. And it's really, in some ways, a gift because it can let you know that there's something that needs to be addressed.
Absolutely. And I know it's not on a scale of a stroke, but does it still have, are there still long-term effects to your brain?
There can be. I mean, technically, I think in the textbook definition, they say with a TIA that the symptoms resolve. But I've met plenty of stroke survivors through the years that had a TIA, were diagnosed with a TIA, but then had some kind of lingering changes. Maybe they feel like they still are struggling for words a little bit more than they were before the event, or they have some lingering weakness in an arm or a leg. So yes, there can be some continuing changes with the TIA.
Thank you. So my next question, and we talked about even with the resource, the BFAST, some of the changes that happen, but what are some of the most common general effects or challenges some of your survivors may experience after a stroke?
Sure. So where the stroke occurs in the brain will impact the kind of changes someone experiences afterwards.
Okay.
So we know the left side of the brain controls the right side of the body, and then vice versa. So at Stroke Comeback Center, we see a lot of people who've had strokes in the left side of the brain. So they have right-sided weakness in the arm and the leg, or just one, but usually it's both. And because if the stroke is in the left side of the brain, right about here is also where your language is. And so then we see a lot of people that have aphasia. And aphasia has been a big word in the news for anyone that heard about Bruce Willis and his diagnosis of aphasia. Yep. So aphasia is the name for the language disorder that happens when something has happened to that language center in the brain. And it can impact somebody's ability to talk, to listen, to read, and to write. So all the aspects of language. But when aphasia is the result of a stroke, it does not impact intelligence. Yes. So we often say, it's like if all of a sudden tomorrow we woke up in a foreign country where we can't read the signs, we can't speak the language, we don't understand what people are saying to us, we can't just write it down to explain it to them.
Right.
All of a sudden, we can't communicate. But we didn't lose any of the intelligence that we had before that. We just didn't have the language. We don't have the language skills to express our thoughts.
So is it like being trapped? So you have what you want to.
Yes, absolutely. You have
Frightening.
you have what you want to say, but you can't find the words to express that. Yeah. So we do think it's a little bit different than what Bruce Willis's family has reported in his experience. And there's a whole nother, we could do a whole nother talk about aphasia.
We sure could.
And we think that's maybe a different kind of aphasia. But when aphasia is the result of a stroke, we know that long-term care and long-term services really help those language skills recover over the long haul. And that's a lot of what we work with at Stroke Comeback Center. But again, people can have that one-sided weakness so that they might have an arm or a leg that is maybe completely paralyzed or has some weakness in it so they can move it a little bit, but
Okay.
not as much as before. And then when a stroke happens in the right side of the brain is where more of our cognitive skills are. So we think about problem solving, organization, attention, and also insight, which means when someone has a stroke in the right side of the brain, sometimes they're not as aware of the changes that they've had as a result of that stroke.
Oh,
So it's a change in what we call insight.
okay.
Yeah.
So insight. So they don't even know
Yeah,
that, it's affected them in this way and that they're presenting in a specific way.
exactly. Yes. And that can
Okay.
be a challenge for family members
I can
or
imagine.
coworkers or
Especially
your
with
friends.
rehabilitation.
yes, or with rehabilitation. Yes. Uh-huh.
But so we talked about, some of the warning. We did talk about the be fast warning signs, and the first thing that you should do. So who is at risk for developing a stroke?
Well, yeah.
Oh, no, go ahead.
No,
Yeah,
well,
tell us who's at risk.
Well, anyone can experience a stroke at any age. Strokes can happen to babies in utero, and then they can happen throughout the lifespan. So it's important to be able to recognize those signs and symptoms of stroke in everyone. Of course, older adults are at higher risk for stroke, but we see people of all ages at Stroke Comeback Center. Right now, our average age is about 60, which is younger
That's young.
than most people think.
Yeah.
And half of the people that participate in our programs are under 65, which means these are people that are of working age.
I was going to say they're still working.
They're still working. Yes. So there are some risk factors with stroke. Some of it is genetic, but also the big risk factors are high blood pressure, diabetes, and cholesterol. And so if you know that you have one of those conditions, it's so important that it's managed. And that's where that
What was the third one again? You said high blood pressure, diabetes, and I couldn't hear the third.
High cholesterol.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And then also, I just want to mention, if you do have a question, I'll see it in the chat. Okay. And
I've put, yeah.
Okay.
So you do them again, just one more time.
Yep.
One more time.
High blood pressure, diabetes, and cholesterol. Yep. So if you know that you have one of those conditions, it's so important to have that conversation with your doctor and make sure that you're managing those as well as you can. And with something like a TIA, that could be the first time that somebody knows that they have high blood pressure or they have high cholesterol. And so those are important ways that you can reduce your risk factors for stroke. Another risk factor for stroke is having a history of stroke. If someone has one stroke, they could be at higher risk for a future stroke. And so it's really important that stroke survivors continue to have that good conversation with their physicians and making sure that they're doing everything they can to minimize their stroke risk.
Wonderful. So what about the effects of men versus women? Do you see anything interesting there?
Yeah, there is some gender difference in terms of men versus women, but stroke does impact both sexes, and it's not as significant that if you're a man, you don't have to worry about it, or if you're a woman, you don't have to worry about it. Everybody should be aware of it and get that good immediate medical care. It's so essential.
Wonderful. And so you did speak about how a stroke is treated. You talked about TPA and some things, and I was hoping maybe we could go into a little bit more depth of how it's treated and managed And then what is the trajectory of recovery that
Sure.
you normally see
Yeah.
at Stroke
Yeah.
Comeback Center?
Yeah, so once a stroke is diagnosed, if somebody gets to that hospital and is a good candidate for one of those emergency treatments, such as TPN, or TPA, which is the clot buster drug, if they get that immediate treatment, that's wonderful. It really can have some dramatic differences in terms of their long-term outcomes. But either way, the initial stage is what we call medical stabilization. So once they're in the hospital, we want to make sure they're medically stable, that if there are any interventions that can be done at that time, that they have them. And then once a patient is medically stable, they usually move to the next phase, which is inpatient rehab. And that first acute care phase could last a couple of days. It could last longer depending on what's happening and the severity of the stroke and any other medical issues that are going on. So once somebody is medically stable, they often go to inpatient rehab. And this could last between a week and 3 weeks. And that is where they start this long road to recovery with good rehabilitation. So that would be physical therapy to address the mobility changes and the big muscles that are impacted by stroke. It can be occupational therapy, which works on fine motor and your arm, but also how do you do things with one hand. So all of a sudden, you've been a righty your whole life, but now you have to brush your teeth with that left hand. Or how do you, get dressed with only using one hand? How do you do your buttons when you have one hand, right? So occupational therapists are wonderful with helping with all of those, what we call activities of daily living. And then also speech therapy, which as a speech therapist, I'm biased towards, but it's important to learn some communication strategies if people don't have access to their words, if they have aphasia, how do they communicate their needs, or if there are changes to that other side of the brain and they need help with their attention and their problem solving. So the goal of that acute care phase of rehab is to get someone to the point that they're able to go back home. And the ideal course is someone would go from acute or inpatient rehab home, and then maybe they would have a period of home care therapies. But when they're able to then leave home, then there's outpatient rehab. And again, at that point, it might not be all three disciplines. It might not be PT, OT, and speech. It might be the disciplines that that person needs. And that piece also really is impacted by, unfortunately, insurance coverage. Yes. So I was a longtime outpatient therapist, and it's so hard when you know somebody has good potential, but they have a very limited outpatient rehab benefit. Medicare, fortunately, has really changed their regulations in the last couple of years, and people are able to get more outpatient rehab through Medicare than they were a few years ago, which is great. But we know most often the outpatient benefit is doesn't cover the full range of recovery. And that's when services like those at Stroke Comeback Center can come into play. Because we know that recovery can continue forever. Just like our brains are able to learn new things for the duration of our lives, our brains are able to learn new things after a stroke. And so it might be that physically muscles improve and physically language skills improve, but also we know that the body and the brain can learn new ways of doing things forever. And that's really the amazing thing about our community of survivors. They figured out all kinds of things that we wouldn't have thought possible. How we used to have a great class where people would come in and they would share with us how, what something that they've learned to do with one hand, how to eat Maryland blue crabs. How do you, I have a hard time picking blue crabs with two hands.
Me too.
And you end up with it everywhere. But where there's a will, there's a way. And people have figured out how to do that with one hand, how to diaper a baby with one hand.
Wow.
Because what are you going to do when you have a baby, as stroke survivors do? Life continues, and they figure out how to diaper a baby with one hand or tie a necktie.
Wow, that has to be.
Yes, tie your shoes. Or one of the questions that people ask a lot is, how do you just take care of your own fingernails? If you have one hand, how do you trim your nails with that one hand or file your nails with that one hand?
That's a great question.
Yeah. And those are the things that other survivors have figured it out, and they have these great tips and suggestions. And we even have a few of these things on our Instagram channel, where we recorded videos, how to open a wine bottle with one hand, important things.
And very important.
So, as life continues on, recovery continues on. And whether it's through formal rehab programs or available, through your hospital outpatient center, for example, or through programs like ours in Stroke Comeback Center. We do think it is so important that stroke survivors meet each other and connect with each other. And there are also lots of great community support groups. And it's an essential part of the rehab process.
So I think it is so amazing that, folks who suffered this brain injury have found creative ways to adapt.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow. I mean, it just really speaks to the human spirit.
Yeah.
After a health crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But it also, I wanted to make the point that you have to want to work, because it sounds like it's a long road. It's a lifelong recovery, as Suzanne said, and that requires a lot of hours of work.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. It's that internal drive, that internal motivation that is so important. And, we often, recognize that we don't see the people that don't have that, right? That don't have that internal drive. But that's why we like to put this message out there that people after stroke can live rich, active, productive, full lives.
That is very encouraging and inspiring.
Yeah, it's a really inspiring community.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, the trajectory, you experienced a stroke, you're in a hospital setting. So how do you collaborate with the post-acute care facilities like ours at Hebron of Greater Washington? Because we do care for a lot of stroke survivors as well.
Yeah, well, one of the things that we love to do are programs like this. It's our biggest challenge is to just let the community know that we are here. We have a center in Rockville, we have a center in Vienna, and we have a virtual center. So we are able to help survivors who live anywhere in the state of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, or DC. And it's our biggest challenge just to let the communities know that we're here and we're ready to help. So we love doing events like this. We will do them for local hospital stroke support groups.
Okay.
And about once a year, I meet with almost all the stroke support groups in the area. So if you happen to be on this call and you have a stroke support group and you'd like for me or for someone from our organization to come and chat with you all, I'd be happy to. And then we also do public events as well, so that people in the community, whether or not they're affiliated with a hospital or with a stroke support group, know about us too. We do trainings with our local hospitals, particularly with the rehab staff, to let them know about our services, but also let them know about that importance of long-term support for stroke survivors. It's really different when somebody's working with a survivor at day 4 compared to us. We're working with a survivor at year 4. And I know as a treating therapist, it was hard to see that far down the road and see that much potential when that wasn't my daily experience. My daily experience was that really recent stroke. So we love to partner with other stroke providers so that help them see that long-term potential.
Wonderful. So do you need a referral from the physician?
No, absolutely not. So we operate outside of traditional rehab. So some people come to us when they've exhausted their traditional outpatient benefits. Some people come to us because they don't have any outpatient benefits, or when they just want more. They want more services or more intensity than they're getting through their traditional rehab. And because we don't participate in insurance programs, it really allows us to keep our fees as affordable as possible for everyone.
Okay.
But also, most importantly, it allows our survivors to make their own decisions. So they can come to us for 1 hour a week and say have a current events discussion group, or they can build a whole schedule of classes that can really challenge their endurance and meet their personal goals. If somebody decides they're going to take, the summer off because they're going on vacation or their kids are at home, then that's fine. They can do that, and then they can come back when they want. And it really gives that flexibility of people being able to design their own recovery.
Wow, that's wonderful. It really puts them in the driver's seat.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I want to get to a few questions.
Sure.
Which is the fun part.
Yeah.
So we have our first question. Are you seeing a lot of people with stressful jobs, but don't necessarily have those 3 risk factors we talked about: high cholesterol, high blood pressure,
Diabetes.
and diabetes?
Yes, we do. But we also are in the Washington, D.C. area. So it's a high stress community. I think there probably is a good study out there. I don't know if they could find a low stress community if one exists, but to compare it to, but we definitely do see a lot of people that have had a stressful life. One thing about stroke is it's a great equalizer. It doesn't matter if you're the CEO and the founder of a corporation, or if you're at the very, very bottom rung, the newest hire, the lowest, level employee. Stroke can happen to both. And what's been neat to see in our programs is that those 2 people are sitting at the same table. They're working on the same goals. Because it's unfortunately an equal opportunity experience.
So it is safe to say there is maybe some relationship then between stress.
Yes, there can be. And a lot of it comes back to that healthy lifestyle too. That people that manage stress well, that exercise, that have a healthy diet, that do all those things to manage a healthy lifestyle, could have a lower stroke risk compared to somebody that doesn't do anything to manage their stress or has a very unhealthy lifestyle.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Because, even though you said, your average age was what, 60 that you see at stroke
Yeah.
Right. So,
right. Yes.
So that was a great question. Thank you so much. So our next question is, how is it determined if a person needs acute rehab or subacute rehab after experiencing a stroke? Great question.
That is a great question. A lot of it depends on the stroke survivor's endurance. It is really hard to be in acute rehab. It is therapy, a minimum of 3 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week. It's intensive rehab. And sometimes that is just more than the stroke survivor can handle immediately following the stroke. And in those cases, they might go to subacute care. It will give them some more time for some healing. There is a natural recovery period after a stroke. We think about it, whether it was a blockage or a bleed, either way, that can create some swelling in the brain. As that swelling goes down, sometimes, people's alertness improves, their endurance improves. There's often a thought that immediate time after a stroke is the most important for recovery. And that is something that I think a lot of physicians really push. But what we're finding now is that sometimes it's too soon for someone to have a therapy that's that intense. They can't handle it. They can't maximize the benefit of that intense therapy because they need a little bit more time first. And that's okay. I mean, it's important to have the intensity of therapy at the time that the survivor is ready for it.
And so you're right. I've never thought of that because I just want to share a personal story. A friend of mine, he's 1 year older than me and he's not in his 60s and nowhere near it. A family friend, and he suffered a stroke at 44. And he does have a stressful job. He doesn't live in the DMV, but I noticed that, and we all have in his family, that he doesn't, it's hard to motivate him, especially, you know, at first when he first suffered the stroke. So maybe it was too soon to go to such an intense therapy, because if I'm not mistaken, I think he has maybe 3 to 6 hours a day.
Yes, it's
And
a lot.
That's very rigorous.
Yes, it's a lot.
So that's an interesting insight.
And I was just saying, sometimes with the older adults too, you know, we think of people that are, you know, the opposite of that 44-year-old stroke survivor. And 3 hours of intense activity might have been too much for them without a stroke. So you add a stroke on top of it, you know, depending on their level of activity. So you add a stroke on top of it, and sometimes that acute rehab is just too intense. And it's just important to recognize that every stroke is different. So therefore, every recovery and rehab path afterwards should be different too.
Everyone is unique. Thank you.
That's right.
Such a great question. And then this is a great question because I also read an article about this. So someone's asking, what about the change yesterday on low dose aspirin for older adults?
Yes. You know what? I read the headline, but I did not read the article. So
I read it. It didn't have a lot of meat to it, but
Yeah.
it basically said that after a certain age, this is no longer an ideal treatment to prevent stroke.
Okay, good. Well, I will go back
And
and
the
I will.
side effects are greater than the benefit. The side effects
Thank
being
you.
Okay,
GI bleeding and also brain bleeding. And
okay,
it's been found that if you don't have a previous history of heart attack or stroke and you're taking it preventatively, you cause more problems than you solve.
Thank you
Right.
so much for that update.
Yeah,
Thank
that
you.
was the thing. If you didn't if you hadn't had a previous heart attack, and I was taking low dose aspirin for years. And when they came out about, I don't know, maybe 3 to 6 months ago, we stopped it for me, according to my doctor. She agreed.
I would say, yes, that's a great conversation to have with your doctor,
Right.
because your doctor should help you be able to manage the risk versus the benefit of any medication. One thing we do want to make sure people know too is that there was an old recommendation, and I know I've seen it on social media where people post these memes that if you think you're having a stroke or you think you're having a heart attack, to take a baby aspirin, but that is definitely not a generally advised recommendation. So it would be a good conversation to have with your doctor if an aspirin regimen is right for you. And also when having that conversation, say, what should you do if you think you are having a medical event? My guess would be the doctor would say, don't take it, but I can't say that for everyone.
Call 911.
Call 911. That's what you definitely, that's the right answer.
Thank you. And thank you for the feedback, the information. Really appreciate that. It's a great question as well. So another wonderful question. Are there personality changes after someone suffers a stroke?
There certainly can be, especially if that stroke is on the right side of the brain. We see that more often, that people's attention is different. So it might be their attention, being able to attend to other people they're having a conversation with, or their attention to detail with, things they leave around the house, that people say he was never someone that let any clutter, be around. And now like our bathroom's a mess and nothing's ever put away. And, those things can change as well. In terms of when the stroke is on the left side of the brain, our language is how we communicate and we interact with others. So if someone's had a change in their language, it can change things like their sense of humor. Humor is so hard. It's so language based. Anyone that studied a foreign language knows how hard humor can be in that foreign language. You know, why is everybody laughing and I'm not, or why did I laugh and no one else did? And so something like humor is totally based on the subtleties of language. And so when somebody has aphasia or a change in their language, it can really impact their ability to tell a joke or follow a joke or have that quick, witty sense of humor that they had before, which can ultimately change how people perceive their personality as well.
Wow, that's so interesting. And it brought up another question that I have. Do you see a lot of folks suffering from depression after a stroke?
It's a great question. Yes, absolutely. There's a very high incidence of depression after stroke. And we think it's really for two reasons. One, life changed dramatically and instantly. And so people have a great amount of loss. People often lose their profession. They lose, which is a big part of their identity. They lose their ability to communicate with people that are important to them. They lose their ability to interact with their hobbies, with their community groups. There can be so much loss immediately after a stroke and in the months to come. Unfortunately, we often see, just with other long-term diagnoses, that immediately after event, the community rallies and casseroles are delivered and what can I do, and let me help in any way, and then everyone's life moves on and relationships change. And we know that stroke can be very isolating because of all that. And that's why, we want everyone to know, all the stroke survivors in our region, to know that we are here to connect people and to do what we can to minimize that isolation. Also, the other reason that depression is so prevalent after stroke is because neurologically the brain has changed and the brain chemistry has changed. And there are a lot of people that respond very well to a period of time of having some medical intervention for that depression, so through medications. And it's so important, if you see that in a stroke survivor or stroke survivors see that in themselves, to know that it's a very, very common outcome of stroke. And again, talk to your doctor about it. And I see there's a question in the chat here about someone who said, on a related topic, they have a friend that gets very tearful easily.
Yeah. So that's normal to see.
That is normal to see. And there's a name for that. It's called lability. And that can happen when the stroke has impacted a particular region of the brain. Sometimes someone cries very easily. And they can cry as an outcome of any strong emotion. Something's really funny, they cry. Something they're really happy, they cry. They're really sad or angry, they cry. And it's just that response to a strong emotion in the brain. On the other end, sometimes people laugh. And so something's really sad and they laugh, or they're scared and they laugh. And that's even more confusing, I think, sometimes. But again, it's just that is the brain's response to that strong emotion. And people often ask, what do you do about it? And I think the number one thing to do is ask that survivor, what do you want me to do when this happens? Some people want to just continue on and ignore it. Other people say, you know what, it's okay that you acknowledge it. And usually people respond well to just giving them some time to let that immediate surge of emotion pass, and then they can continue on.
So do you see things like that? Does that last for a while, or does that sometimes resolve as well?
Yes, it can resolve, and both. It can resolve. Hopefully with time it will get better, or will be better managed. There are some medications that help with that as well. But it can also improve with time, just through the natural healing.
Wonderful. So we have another question. Are all of these side effects similar for TIAs or only for a full stroke? Because our audience member believes that her father has had a TIA, but I don't know how to know for sure.
Yes, any one of those symptoms could be a TIA. Any one of those symptoms could be a stroke. So the difference is just that usually in a TIA, that symptom resolves. So it could be one or several of those symptoms, but they are the same, whether it's a stroke or a TIA.
So as far as you said that it resolves, does it resolve a little bit quicker?
Definitely, yes. So it resolves quicker.
Okay, wonderful.
The thing that can be tricky about knowing if a TIA happened, because the blood clot, say if it would passed or through the brain, that then later, if they go for that MRI, they wouldn't see it.
Okay,
But if you think that it's a potential in your father, I would make sure that he's having that conversation with his doctor.
yes, and that's a great question. Yes, so make sure that you discuss it with his primary care physician. I know that parents can be very stubborn
Yes, they can.
sometimes. We
Yeah.
love them. Next question that I think that I really have is, you talked about community support. And can you remind our audience again, your locations, where you're located?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have a center in Rockville. It is on Rockville Pike at Edmonston, up by, people in the area know where the Zips dry cleaner is, that building.
Okay.
So it is right on Rockville Pike. And then we also have a center in Vienna, which is near the Whole Foods in Vienna. We always like to give good landmarks. And then we have our virtual center. So that's available to anyone in the state of Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, or DC.
And so so you have a virtual center.
Yes.
Oh, so that's very convenient.
It is, yes. We were fortunate that we just dipped our toe into virtual classes at the end of 2019. We thought we'd give it a try. And well, then fast forward to March 2020, and then we moved everything virtual. And we stayed virtual for a year and a half and did everything, all of our programs on Zoom, just like this. And then we reopened, and our Vienna and our Rockville centers are open again. But we found that virtual really works. And so our virtual center is still our biggest center, our most active center. We think, no transportation needed. That's a big thing around here with our traffic. But also, you can't beat the ease of convenience. And we have a lot of people that may come into the center one day and participate in one of our classes in person, but then on other days they do virtual. And so we know virtual's here to stay.
Right. And it's, they don't have to get a ride, they kind of can still be independent while interacting. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. And there's something about, the Zoom, as you all know, since you're on it, you kind of get into the Zoom and you forget that you forget you're there.
Right. The Zoom zone.
The Zoom zone. Yes.
Yeah. So we have another great question. Can you describe a few programs that you have available to stroke survivors? And I like that she used stroke survivors.
Yes, me too.
Great question.
Yep. Absolutely. So we have a wide range of classes. We do all our work in small groups that we call classes. We have a wide range of classes that support all different changes after a stroke. So in our communication classes that are there to support people with aphasia, we have classes that are very topic driven. So a current events discussion group or a book club, or we have a class we call Hot Topics, where we come in and we talk about all the things that you've been told you're not supposed to talk about. So we talk about politics and religion and controversial issues. It's great. That class had a waiting list. It's basically all the things you talk about with your friends and neighbors and your family. And then we also have skill-based classes. So that might be a class like parts of speech, or where they really want to work on making sure that their nouns and their verbs and their adjectives are all in the right order. Or Memory 101, where we talk about different memory strategies to support memory changes after a stroke. In addition to all of those, we have adaptive fitness classes, we have yoga classes, we have music therapy, and we have art classes. We have our family and care partner support group, and we have social events and educational events. So we've got a lot going on.
I really love
Yeah.
that you have so much support for not only just your survivors, but their family as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Their lives changed dramatically
Yeah.
and suddenly as well.
It's important to note that. Great question.
Mhm.
So this is a great question too. What about your folks that are a little bit tech, challenged with tech?
We can help you out with that. In that first week in March of 2020, after both Virginia and Maryland's governors told us that we had to stop our in-person programs, we gave ourselves 1 week, and in that 1 week, we trained 80 stroke survivors how to use virtual services.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're talking about, this was a time where no one knew how to use Zoom, and we're talking about people that you couldn't just say, go to the app store, download this app, I'm going to email you a link and click it at the right time. Like that's not how we work. So do. Right. So we've been able to help everyone that's wanted to be in a virtual program. We've been able to help them get online. Okay. You can use a smartphone, you can use a laptop, you can use a desktop, you can use anything that's connected to the internet with a camera and a microphone and a screen, and we can make it happen from there.
Thank you. And that was a great question. Thank
Yes.
you. So then
Can I just make a follow-up point as a physician, something else that people can do for themselves? You mentioned the risk factors of genetic and pressure and diabetes and cholesterol. I would also point out that about 70 years ago, it was described that patients who had clots in the carotid artery had an increased likelihood of having a stroke. Dr. Fisher, a neurologist, doing autopsies, found that in patients who had had strokes, many of them had blockages in the carotid artery. The reason I mention it is because when a patient goes to see a physician, it's useful for the physician, and sometimes it's necessary for the patient to remind the physician to put a stethoscope on the neck, and you can hear frequently what's called a bruit, B-R-U-I-T, which is a noise that is able to be heard by the physician in the stethoscope. Alternatively, sometimes a patient themselves can put a hand on the side of the neck and feel what is called a thrill, T-H-R-I-L-L, which is the sensation that blood is passing past an obstruction. And when you know that has been the case, if you bring that to the attention of the physician, sometimes it can result in having that clot cleaned out, atherosclerotic obstruction cleaned out, which will prevent strokes. And a colleague of mine at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. Ashby Moncure, was a pioneer in developing that operation many years ago. And it's very helpful, and it's something that we can do and think of ourselves. You've given an excellent presentation, and you're very much on point about the genetics, the pressure, the diabetes, and the cholesterol. And I would just add also from the preventative standpoint to keep the carotid artery in mind. You're doing a great presentation. Thank you.
Okay, doctor, my primary care physician every year checks the carotid arteries in my leg and ankle. Is that the similar thing as what the neck?
Very similar, except of course in the neck it's the carotid, and in the leg it's the femoral. But being aware that atherosclerotic plaque, which is a hard, crusty
that
obstruction,
builds up
builds up and then causes obstruction of the blood vessel. Being aware of that can sometimes save a limb, save a stroke, save a life.
Okay, well, thank you so much. Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, doctor, for the
You're doing a great presentation.
Appreciate
Now,
it.
I thought you were going to say the one thing I forgot to mention as well about stroke prevention, of course, is smoking. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely a risk factor for stroke, which is important to put in this too. We assume that people have stopped smoking and they smoke less than they used to, but there's still a lot of smokers out there, and that is absolutely a risk.
That's right. In fact, we won't even operate on patients who are actively smoking. If it's an elective procedure that does not have to be done, we will tell them stop for a while, then come back to see us. It also is highly associated with arterial insufficiency in the leg. There are a lot of people that lose a toe, a foot, or a leg related to smoking. it's very, very, it has no redeeming features.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. We only have a few minutes real quickly. I think we have a question again about the Rockville location address real quick.
Yep, it's 50 West Edmonston Drive, Suite 301 in Rockville. And the phone number, because we are most often in our Vienna address, if you want a quicker response, just call our 703 number, which is 703-255-5221. And all of that is also on our website, which is strokecomebackcenter.org.
And that is in the chat as well to help you out. And then real quick, how can one access the virtual center? And is there a difference between the cost between the virtual and in-person, which I think is a great question.
Yes, absolutely. So if anyone's interested in joining our programs, whether it's virtual or Vienna or Rockville, the first step is to set up an intake meeting. And an intake meeting is a chance for you to sit down with one of our professionals. We talk about your goals, we talk about your interests, and then we also do just a little bit of work so that we can guide you towards which of our classes would be at a right level for you. The intake fee is $75, and that can be done at any one of our 3 centers. And then after that, we run all of our programs in 9-week sessions. So people can sign up for, say, the book club or a yoga class for 9 weeks. You can jump in the middle of a session. We prorate our fees, and our fees are the same whether it's virtual or in person. We really, really strive to keep our fees as low as possible for everyone. And most importantly, we have a sliding scale based on household income, because it's an important part of our mission that no survivors ever turned away for financial reasons. So if you look at our website, you think, why don't they have their fees on here? It's not because they're so expensive. It's because we don't want them to scare anyone away,
Right.
because we want to work with every family that comes through our doors, virtual or in person, and make sure they become a part of our community. So our website has that information about how to schedule an intake meeting. You can always give us a call or send us an email. If people are curious about learning more about us, we're happy to talk with families. And we're also happy to be a resource if people have other questions about services or programs that can help out stroke survivors, which is why we're happy to have so many great community partners so we can send them in the right direction.
Yes, and thank you. Thank you so much for joining us. This
Oh,
was such
I'm
a
so
wonderful
happy to be
program.
here.
I had such a great time. We had such wonderful questions. Audience, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the wonderful questions and continuing to support the Insider every other week on Wednesday at 12.
Just a quickie before, as a retired speech language pathologist, do you have to be ASHA certified, Maryland State certified? How does that work as far as each of your OT, PT, and SLP certification?
Yes, so all of our communication and cognitive classes are run by licensed and certified speech language pathologists, and that's why we do have a geographic restriction on our virtual programs that you need to be in Maryland, Virginia, DC, or North Carolina, because that's where we have our state licenses.
Thank you.
Our exercise programs are run by group exercise instructors, so they don't have the same geographic limitations. But even one of our yoga instructors is also an SLP. So everyone that works with us is experienced in working with stroke survivors and people with neurological changes.
An amazing program.
Thank you.
So
Very
much.
good program. Thanks a lot.
And thank you, everybody who's tuned in. Thank you, Suzanne, for joining us. Now I feel empowered to be a stroke hero. I hope everybody else does as well.
Yes.
And then before we close, I just wanted to let you know about our upcoming programs. In May 10th, we have our older adults and suicide and introduction to screening and intervention. And then also May 11th, we've got our health and wellness fair. So please come and join us for that. It's complimentary. So we'd love to see you there. And then also May 20th, our annual Sarah and Samuel J. Lessons Healthcare Symposium. So join us for that too. You can join in person or you can join virtually. So we hope to see you there. And until we see you again, have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us.